Hello and welcome to Nutrition Unfiltered, a podcast where science meets sass. I am Christy Maloney, registered dietitian and eating disorder specialist. This is a place where we talk nutrition, ask the hard questions, and have some fun along the way. I'm so glad you're here. Welcome back to Nutrition Unfiltered. Today I have back with me Michelle Brotherton. She was on with me for episode 1 talking about intuitive eating. Today we're going to get to know Michelle a little bit better and then talk about thyroid and hormone health because those are all super buzzwordy right now. So Michelle, tell us a little bit more about you and your background. What led you to dietetics, how you got to Enhance, just kind of your nutrition story.
So I feel like a lot of dietitians, we go through a lot throughout our lives that make us interested in nutrition from like a younger age. So I feel like for me growing up, I saw a lot of chronic disease around me and I was like, I wonder if that's preventable through nutrition.
Yeah.
And it got me really interested in nutrition from a young age. Like since I was 17, I wanted to be a dietitian essentially.
Which is very unusual for dietitians because most of us are like second career kind of people. So
Oh, absolutely.
I love that you knew like straight away.
I hated everything else and I was bad at everything else. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to go for this because I know what I'm talking about. And it clicks with me. And I think that it went too far. I did have an eating disorder and then my thyroid basically combusted. So I have a very personal tie to both eating disorders, but also hormone health that I think affects like so many women. And it's unfortunately not really taken seriously by a lot of their practitioners. So it really made me get more interested in nutrition, having to go through all the issues I did with my own body and come out on the other side a lot better for it.
You knew at 17 you wanted to be a dietitian. So what was your education path? What did that look like for you to get here?
Messy. I think like a lot of dietitians because everything is so kind of weird in dietetics. I'll just say weird. But I have an undergraduate degree in health sciences from Oakland University in Michigan. And then I went for my master's in nutrition science from Alabama, Birmingham. And I took like a 3 to 3.5 year gap in between my undergrad and graduate degree working at WIC. And I'm so glad I did that because I was just not ready to be in a master's degree when I was like 24. So I'm so glad that happened. And then I did the internship and passed the exam. And it sounds so easy saying it out loud right now. But man, like that was a hard few years.
It's like summing up like 4 solid years of difficulty and like, yeah, pass the exam.
Yeah, no big
Sounds
deal.
super breezy. So tell everybody a little bit more about your background with Enhance, how you got here.
Yes. So I was actually in my dietetic internship and I interned for you, Christy, and for your listeners. And I fell into a really wonderful like internship. I got really lucky and I ended up just working for you right from the get-go and it worked out great.
It really did.
And once I saw like outpatient, I was like, yeah, I'm not going to do clinical. I'm not going to be in a hospital because I just fell in love with building relationships with clients over the longer term and outpatient and just being able to really dive into the nitty gritty and have more freedom of what you do with nutrition interventions in outpatient.
And just for like a real quick aside, if another dietetic student's listening to this, what would you say are the pros and cons of private practice?
Oh my gosh. Okay, let's get into that. Pros, you have flexibility in your treatment plan and can really explore different avenues that might not be appropriate in the clinical setting. And then you can really use like your science hat, I think, a lot more, and critical thinking hat a lot more than maybe in a more traditional nutrition setting. I also think that you have more time with the client and you build those relationships. With scheduling, I think it's a great asset to be able to kind of have flexibility in your schedule. So you are doing what works for you. And if you have a non-traditional brain, I hate to say like me because I have ADHD, but if you have a non-traditional brain and don't do well in like a traditional, let's say 8 to 5 or 9 to 5, you can maybe have 3 clients some days, 6 to 7 clients other days, and have a good mix of things to keep you doing what you love and be the best practitioner that you can be without having to work on someone else's schedule necessarily.
Right.
I think cons are that it can just be a lot. I think people look at private practice and think it looks easy
Mhm.
because you are in control of so many things. But the flip side of that is that you are in control of things that you wouldn't have to be in a traditional work setting.
Mhm.
Some scheduling stuff, care coordination, talking with clients and parents and the whole care team. It doesn't really end. It's almost like you can always get an email or phone call and have to deal with it in that moment.
Mhm.
So you just have to be prepared for the other responsibilities that come along with private practice and being able to time management and handle that well.
Right. And then even the ups and downs of if a client doesn't show up, it affects your pay. Those
Yes.
kinds of things are really hard versus a typical salaried position.
Yeah. And I totally forgot about how much you have to hustle to get clients and maintain a client caseload that is, in my opinion, fun and interesting, but for
Mhm.
other people might not be their cup of tea. So it's
Mhm.
just dependent on your personality.
Yeah, absolutely. One thing we wanted to talk about today was thyroid health and hormones. So I know you shared a little bit about your backstory, how you became interested in this kind of thing. So let's talk a little bit about that. So when we're talking about a thyroid, what is that? What does it do? Why is it important?
Our thyroid is a butterfly shaped gland in the base of our neck that controls metabolism, growth and development, even certain cognition related things such as like mood stabilization,
Mhm.
and is really important systemically in our body. So when things go haywire with the thyroid, it can really have profound effects on how someone feels day to day.
Mhm.
And I think when people talk about hormone balance, that is really central to how their thyroid is functioning.
Mhm.
And it can cause a lot of issues when it's hypothyroid, meaning underactive, or hyperthyroid, meaning overactive.
What exactly are hormones? We hear about that so much, balancing your hormones, hormone health. How do you define hormones and why do you feel like they're so important?
Let me put on my, endocrine hat for a second. Let's get
Love
into the
that.
science
Love that.
behind it. So think about adrenals, pituitary gland, thyroid. For males, testes; for women, ovaries produce hormones. And hormones are basically little chemical messengers that go through our body to the tissues and organs to create an action. So when we think about thyroid, it produces thyroid hormone, which goes to the different tissues and organs in our bodies to affect growth and development and metabolic function, temperature regulation. So basically, it's a chemical messenger that goes elsewhere in the body to perform an action. And why it's so important is that without hormones, our body wouldn't be able to perform just vital functions to survive and grow and age.
Mhm.
And when things go haywire with hormones, AKA like hormone imbalance, not having enough of a certain hormone or having too much of a certain hormone, it can, like I said, have profound systemic effects depending on what that hormone is supposed to act on in the body.
What are some signs of those hormonal imbalances?
In terms of general hormone imbalances, the best way I can describe it is feeling off. You're
Mhm.
just not feeling quite right.
Right, like a gut instinct that something's not right.
Yes.
Mhm.
For many, especially women, because hormone issues are very, I hate to say more likely to happen to women, but as women, we go through a lot
Mhm.
with periods, pregnancy, postpartum, menopause.
Mhm.
It typically can come out such as like with fatigue and feeling sluggish day to day, maybe constipation or diarrhea, maybe just new symptoms happening. But very commonly too, like menstrual cycle can be affected
Mhm.
where maybe you're having secondary amenorrhea where your period has gone away, or you're struggling with infertility or PMDD, or just, yeah, like not feeling quite right month to month. And that's like when I have a client that's describing these types of symptoms, the first thing I do is say, have you talked to your OBGYN about this? Have
Mhm.
you seen an endocrinologist? Because you need to get testing to kind of figure out what is happening with your hormones at that point.
Yes, absolutely. We need definitive tests to kind of figure out what's going on in the body, especially like you said, when you're really going off a gut instinct that something just isn't quite right. What are things that you're seeing that are rampant on social media that are like just not true about hormone health?
Hormone health on social media is good in a lot of ways because it's being talked about,
Mhm.
but it's bad in a lot of ways because it's taking nuggets of truth and extrapolating it to be a catch-all diagnosis for a lot of
Mhm.
symptoms. So the biggest things that I see that are not true are things that like take this supplement to cure your hormone imbalance or eat carrots to cure your hormone imbalance.
How are carrots the savior
I
here?
think it was related to like estrogen dominance.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
So us PCOSers need to eat all the carrots.
exactly.
Got it. Okay.
Right. And like you'll just turn a little bit more orange if you do that, but like you won't cure a hormone imbalance.
Right.
So I think that like in a nutshell, the biggest myth that I see is that you can just do one thing to fix X problem. And unfortunately, the endocrine system is so intricate. It is not like that at all, thank God, or else we would just
Mm.
be all, taking time bombs, like doing one thing and then having a disruption. So
Right.
other myths that I've seen very commonly relate right now to cortisol.
Mhm.
So, cortisol is a really big buzzword on social media right now where people are kind of really interested in managing their cortisol
Mhm.
production. And what is cortisol? Cortisol is a stress hormone that really relates to like our fight or flight. Because we have two, well, we can just get into it.
Let's do it.
Two
Let's go.
ways that we can be right with our central nervous system. We can be in a sympathetic state, which is fight or flight, or a parasympathetic state, which is rest and digest. And unfortunately, with how our culture is set up, I think people really are in their fight or flight more often than
Mhm.
they need to be.
Yeah.
So they're running off of caffeine and skipping meals and doing HIIT workouts every day and under eating and wondering why they can't sleep at night, but then they're so like stressed and tired the next day.
Tired but wired.
Tired but wired,
Mhm.
exactly, with like often dependence on caffeine or maybe stimulants to kind of get through. And those are all telltale signs that, yeah, something may be happening with your cortisol. And what I tell people is if you think that your cortisol is kind of like awry, you don't necessarily need a test because you can just see how you're feeling.
Yeah.
And we can go from there. And I think that people are so interested in cortisol on social media because it is like the very common buzzword right now. And it's really easy to kind of blame things on cortisol. But what I want people to know about cortisol is that it's a normal response.
Mhm.
We should be having fluctuations in our cortisol that are kind of the normal ebbs and flows. So if someone hits your car and you're kind of like neutral about it, I would say that's not normal.
Yeah.
Our cortisol is there to protect us if we're in danger. It kind of is like the fight or flight response to like solve the situation, or maybe you're in danger and need to get away. And that's very, very normal. Issues happen when people's cortisol, though, is high all the time. And on social media, I think that it's really scary when you search cortisol because it's kind of promoted as a bad thing. But what I want people to know is that it's a normal thing. You just kind of
Mhm.
want to manage the spikes and lows as much as you can.
What are things that you've seen on social media in terms of ways to manage cortisol? Are they true? Are they not? What would you recommend?
Things that I've seen commonly are to really go on like more of like a whole foods diet that's
Mhm.
usually pretty strict as promoted on social media. But more than that, it's usually related to supplementation. Just take this one supplement and it will fix your cortisol issues. Whether it's a proprietary blend being sold
Which
by
means
an
what?
influencer,
Proprietary.
it's a mix of ingredients that we don't know exactly what's in it. And they don't have to tell you exactly what's in it,
Right.
which is dangerous
Right.
with
And
exclamation mark,
unregulated.
and unregulated by the
Mhm.
FDA.
Yes.
So really you can be taking a supplement that's proprietary and not really know what's in it.
Mhm.
And the example that I like to give to my clients is that the pre-workout Jacked from like about 10 to 15 years ago actually had like methamphetamines in it as a part of their proprietary blend, and they were sued out their ass. And
I bet.
yeah. And I tell people like, yeah, you don't know exactly what's in it. So a supplement that you're buying off of TikTok or Instagram could have literally anything in it and you don't really know.
Right. Kind of like when they were prescribing cocaine in the 60s to housewives that were like bored and stressed.
Oh,
Like we can look
exactly.
back and say that's probably not a great idea, which is where we're at now with Jacked.
Oh, yeah. The
Mhm.
equivalent today is like buying a supplement off TikTok. Like you're really taking a gamble.
Oh man. So if somebody feels like they might have high cortisol, what do they do? What would you recommend as ways to kind of help get back in alignment?
Getting enough rest is vital. So I tell people if your cortisol is high all the time or you're feeling just tired but wired, that is your body telling you in a nutshell that it's lacking resources.
Mhm.
You need to really get more rest, maybe take a break off of real high intensity exercise for a hot minute and look at your diet. And when I say look at your diet, I don't mean that you have to diet. I mean, are you getting the nutrients that your body needs to survive? And for the bare basics for many people, it's going to be getting back to eating breakfast again,
Mhm.
getting enough protein and enough carbs, getting enough produce in the diet, getting enough water. And notice I'm saying the word enough a lot.
Mhm.
And it's not anything about restriction, but it's more about addition to the diet, not subtraction. Because
Mhm.
I think when you go on social media and people talk about hormone balancing, the big thing that they want to go to first is cutting out all the toxic things, cutting out sugar, cutting out gluten, cutting out dairy to solve hormonal issues. When a lot of the time, the answer is more adding things back in as
Mhm.
at least the first intervention.
Right. I want to go a little bit deeper into that, right? So, when you're thinking about nutrition and the products that contribute to our thyroid and hormone health, are there any specific foods you think that are more helpful than others? And not that that's like an equivalent of the supplement, right? Like eat this one thing and it'll cure you. But are there things that you find helpful?
For thyroid health specifically, there are nutrition interventions that you can do to support your thyroid, absolutely. And I'm going to start with the foundational things first and then move up the pyramid right to the fun things and supplementation. So, foundationally for thyroid health, you need enough calories.
Okay.
If someone is suffering from thyroid issues, typically with it is unintentional weight changes, which
Mhm.
can be very frustrating, right? If you're just gaining weight out of nowhere, with especially hypothyroidism. And so a lot of people to combat this go on low calorie diets, but low calorie diets can really decrease thyroid function and make the function even worse over time. So I tell people make sure that you're getting enough calories as the bare bones minimum that you do. On top of that, people really need to be conscious of getting enough carbohydrates in their diet. Carbohydrates are vital for the conversion of inactive T4 thyroid hormone to active T3 hormone. So their thyroid might not be able to work appropriately if they're not getting enough carbs, period.
Yeah.
Now, there's also specific nutrients that are vital for thyroid health, including selenium, vitamin D, certain antioxidants. So you really want to take a look at, am I getting enough produce? Am I getting enough protein? Am I getting enough fiber? All the things that we would typically tell clients anyway. And if there's ever a nutrient that someone's deficient in, we can supplement. But what I tell people is like, you want to do targeted supplementation, where if you're deficient on something like vitamin D, you're getting tested and then supplementing. You're not just blind supplementing based off of a recommendation that you saw online.
Right. Right. Is there a population or demographic that you're seeing this more in, right? So if someone comes in and they're looking for hormone balancing, are you seeing that in college age students, midlife women? Where are you finding that the most?
I would say anywhere from like 27 to 40
Okay.
is where I'm seeing that the most. So kind of like late 20s to 40s and sometimes 50s where hormones are changing rampantly. That's where people are most interested in things that they can do for their hormone balance. Um, I do see it sometimes in young 20s just from information on TikTok and Instagram, but I feel like late 20s is when you really start to feel hormone shifts in your body and you're like, wait, I don't feel like a teenager anymore. And maybe it's my
Right.
hormones.
And like we're not supposed to.
Right, exactly.
Is there anything that you would tell someone in their late 20s, early 30s versus someone who's 45 or 50? Would you give those people different recommendations, or do you find that it's generally the same across the board?
I feel like it does change as people enter their late 30s, early 40s.
Mhm.
Really, the biggest change that I think happens with nutrition is that people really need to be on their calcium and protein intake as they approach perimenopause and menopausal age, and on strength training. So it becomes way more vital. So, in a nutshell, I think that a lot of the recommendations stay similar, but they do change a little bit as people get older.
Are there any other trends on TikTok or Instagram that you've seen going around that just drive you absolutely crazy?
Okay, so the biggest myths that drive me nuts are in relation to thyroid health, actually. One of the biggest myths that I see is that you can solve thyroid issues, quote unquote, like naturally. And for some people that are maybe having some like subtle thyroid issues, possibly that may be true.
Mhm.
But for other people where their thyroid is attacking itself, like through Hashimoto's or autoimmune thyroid disease, you might need medication for the rest of your life. And that is not a bad thing.
Right.
That's not anything that is like that you should feel guilty about. Because I think that a lot of the things on social media say like solve things naturally because medication is poison or it's big pharma or it's big food or whatever.
Mm.
And that really drives me crazy because like you have to take an approach that works for you. And for some people, that includes lifelong medications, and that doesn't mean that you failed anything.
Right.
My thyroid, they said it looks like cottage cheese and it has holes all over it and it's non-functioning.
I really want to see an image of this
Oh
because
my
that's
gosh.
super interesting to
I
me.
was like, ew, when I saw it. And I was like, wait, that's normal, right? And they're like, no. No. So like I am someone that needs medication for the rest of my life, and I'm okay with that. And I think other people need to be okay with exploring traditional Western medicine modalities because it really is helpful and vital to live a healthy
Mhm.
life. And on top of that, doing the more holistic approaches are vital as well. Working on nutrition, getting enough sleep. And it's like everything on social media is so like one-sided. Like
Mhm.
if you're going to do this, you should do it naturally and cut out gluten and dairy and all the things. And it's like, well, that may work for you, but for a lot of people, they'll quit it in a month and it won't end up solving their problem and will make them worse.
Yes.
So I think that the biggest grievance I have on social media in a nutshell is that it's not balanced.
Yep. It's very baity in terms
Mhm.
of like, I want to put out the most extreme thing to get attention, to get views,
Right.
whatever. Yeah.
Right.
And they might really believe that, but I agree. It's all very one sided. So, when we're talking about hormone health, that kind of thing, especially for women, 1 in 10 women have PCOS. We really kind of want to talk about that as well, right? So, we've looked at what someone in their late 20s versus someone who's menopausal might do a little bit differently. What advice would you have for a woman that's struggling with PCOS because it is a hormonal condition?
For PCOS, I think a good starting point is to obviously get labs done and work with a dietitian because we can really do targeted approaches to address hormonal imbalances. Very often in PCOS, there's high insulin, high blood sugar, high A1C, possibly high cholesterol. And with sex hormones, often high testosterone, high estrogen, and low progesterone is like very common. So, a lot of hormone stuff.
Mhm.
So, before we can do a targeted approach, we need to know where everything's at. But the biggest interventions that help with PCOS are to make sure you're getting a more moderate to high protein diet
Mhm.
and make sure you're getting fibrous carbs, getting enough sleep, exercising in a way that is sustainable for you. And it's super not, crazy interventions. They're just
Mhm.
sustainable, but also they have to be consistent interventions to help the individual. And on top of that, there's a lot we can do with supplementation depending on the person. So taking things like myo-inositol, sometimes even berberine for blood sugar can be helpful. But really, if you have 10 PCOS clients, you might have 10 different interventions that work for the person.
Absolutely. It definitely does present differently in everybody. So what do you think, right? If someone goes to their OBGYN and they're diagnosed with PCOS, the first two things you hear, well, the first three things really are, here's your birth control, here's your metformin, go lose some weight.
Mm-hmm.
Right. What do you think about that? Are there other things, I know you mentioned targeted interventions with nutrition and supplementation. Are there any other things you would say to that being like the first line?
I mean, the initial thought that comes to my brain is that that's really frustrating. And I think that a lot of women get frustrated hearing that as well, in terms of like, just go lose weight, because they've probably tried that.
And if you have PCOS, you're probably already higher body weight. You've
Right.
probably been dieting.
Right. And if
Mhm.
someone is, at a higher body weight, I think that is really just like dismissive to
Yes.
all the issues that they're struggling with on a day-to-day basis. What I try to do with my clients is focus on the controllable factors, not the outcomes. So a doctor telling you just to lose weight is an outcome. It's not a bad outcome, but
Right.
it's also not completely within our control all the
Right.
time. So controllable factors are nutrition interventions, movement, stress management, sleep. And I tell people, can we focus on all of those things, like what's in our control, and then see where your body likes to land? So it's kind of a different approach. And personally, I'm not against at all weight loss.
Sure.
I think that for a lot of people, it does end up like helping in the long run, but it's not the outcome that we focus on
Right.
in our sessions.
Right. You want to focus on the behaviors, the healthy behaviors.
Exactly.
Yep. So with hormone health, I think we'd be remiss to not discuss endocrine disruptors. That also is a buzzword. So we really think about how that can interfere with hormones, with sex hormones, those kinds of things. What do you think about those?
So endocrine disruptors, and I'm a dietitian, not a doctor or scientist or chemist, okay?
Disclaimer.
Disclaimer. The research that I've read on hormone disruptors it's honestly, like, from what I've seen, not extremely conclusive.
Mhm.
Like, you have to take what you see with a grain of salt. In my opinion, with hormone disruptors, it's great to be mindful of the total load that you're getting, whether it's in cosmetics, cleaners that you're using, what you're exposed to on a day-to-day basis. It's probably smart to be an informed consumer and make decisions based off of that. That being said, I think it's really overblown in how it's purported in the media, because it takes a lot of hormone and endocrine disruptors to have an impact on our bodies. Our bodies are really good at filtering out waste. And toxins. That's what our lungs and our kidneys and our skin, like all of our organs, are there to help protect us. Bowel movements, like that filters out toxins. So I tell people, be an informed consumer, but don't let it overrule your life to the point that's stressing you out, because stress will create more oxidative stress than any one product or ingredient will in your body. So you really just have to have a balance of being mindful of what you're taking in your body in terms of like products and food and maybe certain toxins or maybe certain phytochemicals or chemicals that you personally want to stay away from, but also don't let it overrule your life, like in a nutshell.
Because the stress is equally, if not more, unhealthy for you.
Yes. Something that I wanted to touch on was why hormone balancing and hormone regulation is so popular on platforms such as TikTok, especially. And I think that there's like two reasons for this. And number one is to sell products. So I have clients every day that come in that are petrified to eat certain ingredients, that are petrified to be exposed to certain chemicals, that are scared now to eat gluten. And they see it from an influencer who is coincidentally, but not so coincidentally, selling a product.
Imagine.
Right. So I think that a lot of the misinformation on social media is driven by money. because they know that they can harness people's vulnerability and emotions on a platform such as TikTok and Instagram and make them scared of certain products. And then guess what? They have a product that will solve your issues.
Mm-hmm.
So I tell people like to be very mindful of where you're getting your information. Try to only get information from hopefully like medical professionals, like doctors, dietitians, but also like if it's controversial, just be careful of like where you're sourcing your information. And then look at if they're selling you a product. Like if they're trying to sell you a supplement or an exercise routine or a specific meal plan that's like cookie cutter meal plan, just realize that they have ulterior motives and it might not be in your best interest to take their advice about nutrition and health if it's driven by something else. So I think that that is a big driver, right, of like misinformation on social media, but also using like hormone as like a buzzword to sell products. Mm-hmm. And the second reason I think that hormone balancing has like blown up on social media is because unfortunately people have really been invalidated about this in real life, mm-hmm. like going to their doctor, feeling unwell, and their doctor says your labs are fine, so you must be fine. And they go searching online for more information because they're like, I don't feel fine. So there's a really big community on social media because there's a lot of women, or I would say just like people in general, that are suffering from very real symptoms that aren't being taken seriously by like medical professionals. So they find community online. And that makes things absolutely blow up, right? Mm-hmm. Because they're like, oh, this influencer suffered from fatigue and unintentional weight gain and IBS-like symptoms like I do. I'm going to follow them and I'm going to try what they're doing. So I think it's on one hand great that it's being talked about on social media to give people a sense of community. Maybe they're trying some anecdotal things that their influencer or whatever is following and it's working for them. And that's like, whatever, that's good in a lot of ways. But in a lot of ways, it's bad because sometimes it's not evidence-based and sometimes it's not leading to healthy outcomes for people, or maybe it's spiraling into orthorexia or an eating disorder or undernourishment for some people because they are not doing what's right for their bodies and following what someone else is doing. And it's being taken to the extreme. Right. So in a nutshell, I just think that that's why hormone balancing has like blown up on social media is due to money and also people's experiences being invalidated.
Right. Yeah. So that's sales 101, right? Find a problem to solve and solve it. So even if there's not one to solve, we'll create a problem to sell the answer. And then to your second point, it sounds like a desperation to feel better, which is understandable and sad that ultimately that's where a lot of people feel like they have to go.
Yeah. And, you know, I think behind every myth on social media, it always starts from a nugget of truth. Mm-hmm. So I think it's really frustrating sometimes that people invalidate other people's experiences saying, you know, hormone imbalance isn't real. And like, you're just exaggerating, or that's not a thing, like leaky gut's not a thing, and like whatever. Mm-hmm. And I think that you have to look at the root of like why this started in the first place. Like hormone imbalance is very real and affects people with thyroid issues, PCOS, infertility, losing their period, PMDD, menopause every single day. So it's real. It's just, it's been used as a blanket statement without enough data and criteria in a lot of people. And like people just assume they have a hormone imbalance without the proper testing or seeing the right practitioners, which is the problem. Mm-hmm. So like everything in nutrition and health online, the real answer falls in the middle. Like it's very nuanced. It's not black and white. And it just takes a lot of investigative work from a care team that you trust to help you get to the root issue.
Yeah, I find myself always thinking with nutrition, if somebody doesn't, you know, if you're seeking nutrition advice and that person doesn't respond with something to the effect of it depends, or if this is happening, then maybe that, and it's cookie cutter is probably not great advice.
No, I completely agree with that. I think that if you're following people that seemingly like they act like they have all the answers and they can solve all your problems and they've never met you,
right?
Run. Like they are selling you something or they are full of it. And I think of a lot of the influencers that have blown up on social media, like, Carnivore MD and Liver King, and like they all have really extreme black and white views on nutrition. And the more that you learn about nutrition and really dive into the science, it's very, very, very nuanced. And I think any good practitioner or dietitian or health professional, the more that you learn about nutrition, the more that you realize that you don't know. So you have to be really like open about that and try to take it on a case-by-case basis to try to help the individual get to the root of their specific issues by using evidence-based nutrition interventions and not fad diets or gimmicky interventions that might cause people harm in the long run.
No, that makes so much sense, and I couldn't agree more. So thank you so much for being on here and talking about hormone health. It's so great to have you back. If someone wants to connect with you or find you online, what's the easiest ways for them to do that?
So they can go to our website, enhancednutritionassociates.com, and my name is Michelle. But also you can follow me on Instagram. My Instagram handle is nutritionwchelle, nutrition with Shell. And I'm on TikTok and Instagram, and I try my best to debunk things on Instagram and TikTok. So you can follow me there.
Love it. Thank you so much for joining me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for joining me today on Nutrition Unfiltered. If you enjoyed today's episode, please share with others that might enjoy it as well. You can follow me on Instagram at eatingdisorder.dietitian. Thanks for getting sassy with me.